Hello everyone, this is Shmuel Moshe, and you are listening to the Weekly Parashahcast, the weekly Torah portion podcast where I read the weekly Torah portion and then provide my own interpretation of what I think it all means. As always, I remind everybody I am not a professional Torah scholar, just somebody who wished to study the Torah. This week's portion is Leviticus 1, aka Vayikra. That's right, we are starting on the third book of the Torah, the third of the books of Moses, Vayikra, Leviticus, which translates to, and he called, or and called. Leviticus chapter 1. We'll be reading along with Chabad.org's translation of the text if you want to follow along, and we'll be jumping right in. This week's portion falls on the 13th of Adar Bet, 5784, March 23rd, 2024. Let's begin. Leviticus chapter 1, first portion. And he called to Moses, and the Lord spoke to him from the tent of meeting, saying, Speak to the children of Israel, and say to them, When a man from among you brings a sacrifice to the Lord, from animals, from cattle, or from flock, you shall bring your sacrifice. If his sacrifice is a burnt offering from cattle, an unblemished male, he shall bring it. He shall bring it willingly to the entrance of the tent of meeting before the Lord. And he shall lean his hand forcefully upon the head of the burnt offering, and it will be accepted for him to atone for him. And he shall slaughter the young bull before the Lord. And Aaron's descendants, the Kohanim, shall bring the blood, and dash the blood upon the altar, around the altar which is at the entrance of the tent of meeting. And he shall skin the burnt offering, and cut it into prescribed sections. And the descendants of Aaron the Kohen shall place fire on the altar, and arrange wood on the fire. And Aaron's descendants, the Kohanim, shall then arrange the pieces, the head and the fat, on top of the wood which is on the fire that is on the altar. And its innards and its legs he shall wash with water. Then the Kohen shall cause to go up in smoke all of the animal on the altar, as a burnt offering, a fire offering, with a pleasing fragrance to the Lord. And if his offering is brought from the flock, from sheep, or from goats as a burnt offering, he shall sacrifice it an unblemished male. And he shall slaughter it on the northern side of the altar, before the Lord. And Aaron's descendants, the Kohanim, shall dash its blood upon the altar around. And he shall cut it into its prescribed sections, with its head and its fat, and the Kohen shall arrange them on top of the wood which is on the fire that is on the altar. And the innards and the legs he shall wash with water. Then the Kohen shall offer up all of the animal, and cause it to go up in smoke on the altar. It is a burnt offering, a fire offering with a pleasing fragrance to the Lord. All right, that concludes the first of the portions. So here we're hearing what has been told to Moses is how the burnt sacrifices shall be conducted. So first and foremost, what's the deal with this? It's going to be the offering that is made for just a general sacrifice. It's going to be conducted in this specific way. Now, we're going to hear a lot about these sacrifices for the rest of the portion, so I'd like to bring attention to a specific part of it. Verse 4, And he shall lean his hand upon the head of the burnt offering, and it will be accepted for him to atone for him. So this is a sin offering when he's making atonement, right? Though it doesn't necessarily explain sin, noticing that it's an atonement for him indicates that there's some manner of sin atonement, right? Now, I mentioned again the hand pressing down forcefully upon the head of the burnt offering. Why is that? Is it placing your hand on the offering as if to say, this is my sacrifice? Or is there another aspect to it? Is it being held down so that it may be killed? And I think the reason for this, right, so he brings the hand down forcefully on the head, then he shall slaughter it. So first he puts the hand on the head, the Lord accepts it, and then it's killed. What I find interesting is this hand on head thing, like I mentioned, is going to come up a few times. So I have theories about it. The first that comes to mind is that the hand on the head is a way to, sort of like how people bless things, right? That's one way to go about doing it. They anoint something. Another may be the fact that it's indicated in the parentheticals that it's forcefully put upon the head. So, if anything, that sounds like it's being almost held down. And considering the circumstances around how this slaughter must take place, I think that may not be a bad way to interpret that you're holding it down and holding it steady so that you can kill it in a very specific way without it thrashing about, writhing about, and being killed in a pained state. Rather, it's going to be killed being held still, and so on. Moving on from there, it gets cut up into the relevant parts, and then where it will be sacrificed and so on. The Kohanim are going to fulfill this. Moving on to the second portion, chapter 1, verse 14 of Leviticus. And if his sacrifice to the Lord is a burnt offering from birds, he shall bring it from turtle doves or from young doves. And the Kohen shall bring it near the altar, and nip off its head, and cause it to go up in smoke on the altar. And its blood shall be pressed out upon the wall of the altar. And he shall remove its crop along with its entrails, and cast it next to the altar on the east side, to the place of the ashes. And he shall split it open with its wing feathers intact, but he shall not tear it completely apart. The Kohen shall then cause it to go up in smoke on the altar, on top of the wood which is on the fire. It is a burnt offering, a fire offering with a pleasing fragrance to the Lord. Chapter 2, Leviticus. And if a person brings a meal offering to the Lord, his offering shall be of fine flour. He shall pour olive oil over it, and place frankincense upon it. And he shall bring it to Aaron's descendants, the Kohanim, and from there he, the Kohen, shall scoop out his fistful of its fine flour and oil, in addition to all its frankincense. Then the Kohen shall cause its remainder to go up in smoke on the altar. It is a fire offering with a pleasing fragrance to the Lord. What remains of the meal offering shall belong to Aaron and his descendants. It is holy of holies from the fire offerings of the Lord. And if one brings a meal offering baked in an oven, it shall consist of either unleavened loaves made of fine flour mixed with oil, or unleavened wafers anointed with oil. And if a meal offering on a pan is your sacrifice, it shall be made of fine flour mixed with oil, and it shall be unleavened. Break it into pieces, and you shall then pour oil over it. It is a meal offering. Okay, so here we have the end of the second portion. It specifies what you're going to do if the sacrifice is a bird. Interestingly, it does not say anything about the person holding his hand down on its head. The Kohen will bring the bird to the altar, and then nip off its head, and then cause it to go up in smoke on the altar. So it's going to be decapitated by the Kohen, and then put up in fire. The blood is going to be pressed out along the walls of the altar. So I'm almost thinking of this as a somewhat gruesome portrayal of having you pop the head off of the bird, and then you hold the bird in your hand like a tube of paint as you squeeze the blood along the wall. So it's very much macabre in a way. If you imagine it out of the context, like this is a very visually gruesome act of spreading the blood. Nonetheless, we see the directions here. When he removes its crop along with its entrails and casts it next to the altar on the east side. We note in the previous portion we had sacrifices being put on the north side. So I find that particularly interesting that there are directional significance to where the sacrifice is based on what kind of animal it is, what direction from the altar it will be placed. Definitely something of note to keep in mind. Then there's also the note of the meal offering, which is not an animal, but instead of something that is food, and it's a meal offering, use unleavened, and of course, fine frankincense, oil, things like that. All right, moving on to the third portion. Leviticus chapter 2, verse 7. And if your sacrifice is a meal offering made in a deep pot, it shall be made of fine flour with oil. Thus you shall bring the meal offering which shall be made from these types to the Lord, and he shall bring it to the Kohen, and he shall bring it close to the altar. And the Kohen shall lift out from the meal offering its reminder, and cause it to go up in smoke on the altar. It is a fire offering with a pleasing fragrance to the Lord. And what remains of the meal offering shall belong to Aaron and his descendants. It is a holy of holies from the fire offerings of the Lord. No meal offering that you sacrifice to the Lord shall be made in anything leavened. For you shall not cause to go in smoke any leavening or any honey as a fire offering to the Lord. However, you shall bring them as a first fruit offering to the Lord. Nevertheless, they shall not go up on the altar as a pleasing fragrance to the Lord. And you shall salt every one of your meal offering sacrifices with salt. And you shall not omit the salt of your God's covenant from being placed upon your meal offerings. You shall offer salt on all your sacrifices. When you bring a meal offering of the first grains to the Lord, you shall bring your first grain meal offering from barley, as soon as it ripens, parched over the fire, kernels full in their husks, ground into coarse meal. And you shall put oil on it, and place frankincense upon it. It is a meal offering. Then the Kohen shall cause its reminder to go up in smoke, taken from its coarse meal and from its oil, with all its frankincense. It is a fire offering to the Lord. Okay, so that's the end of the third portion, rather short. The most significant thing here is that this meal is going to be offered. Part of it will go up in fire, part of it will be eaten by the Kohanim, but also nothing can be leavened, also no honey, and make sure that the meal offering includes salt. All right. Very important. It seems that salt is part and parcel of the requirement. Is it because the Kohanim deserve to have seasoned food, or is it because there is significance to the salt elsewise? Could it be related to Sodom and Gomorrah's salt? I just don't know. But nonetheless, that's part of the explanation. And the first of the harvest and so on as well, to be included as soon as it ripens, parched over fire, the kernels full in their husks, ground into coarse meal, frankincense, and so on. Fourth portion, chapter 3, verse 1 of Leviticus. If his sacrifice is a peace offering, if he brings it from cattle, whether male or female, unblemished, he shall bring it before the Lord. And he shall lean his hand forcefully upon the head of his sacrifice, and slaughter it at the entrance of the tent of meeting. And Aaron's descendants, the Kohanim, shall dash the blood upon the altar around. And from the peace offering he shall bring a fire offering to the Lord, comprised of the fat coverings, the innards, and all the fat that is on the innards. And the 2 kidneys, along with the fat that is upon them, which is over the flanks. And he shall remove the diaphragm with the liver, along with the kidneys. And Aaron's descendants shall cause it to go up in smoke on the altar, apart from the burnt offering, which is on the top of the wood that is on the fire. It is a fire offering with a pleasing fragrance to the Lord. And if his sacrifice for a peace offering to the Lord is from the flock, whether male or female, unblemished, he shall bring it. If he brings a sheep as his sacrifice, then he shall bring it before the Lord. And he shall lean his hand forcefully upon the head of his sacrifice, and slaughter it before the tent of meeting. And Aaron's descendants shall dash its blood upon the altar around. And from the peace offering he shall bring a fire offering to the Lord, comprised of its choicest parts, the complete tail, which he shall remove opposite the kidneys, and the fat covering the innards, and all the fat which is on the innards, and the 2 kidneys along with the fat that is upon them, which is over the flanks, and he shall remove the diaphragm with the liver, along with the kidneys. And the Kohen shall cause it to go up in smoke on the altar, as food for the fire, to the Lord. And if his sacrifice is a goat, he shall bring it before the Lord, and he shall lean his hand forcefully upon its head, and slaughter it before the tent of meeting, and Aaron's descendants shall dash its blood upon the altar around. And from it he shall bring his offering, a fire offering to the Lord, comprised of the fat covering the innards, and all the fat which is on the innards, and the 2 kidneys with the fat that is upon them, which is over the flanks. And he shall remove the diaphragm with the liver, along with the kidneys he shall remove it. And the Kohen shall cause it to go up in smoke on the altar, consumed as a fire offering with a pleasing fragrance. All sacrificial fat belongs to the Lord. This is an eternal statute for all your generations. In all your dwelling places you shall not eat any fat or any blood. So we get to hear the details in this fourth portion about peace offerings, whether it's from the cattle, from the sheep, from the goat, how they must be sacrificed. Once again, the forceful hand upon the head. Once again, what is that significance of that? Is it to show that the act is being done mindfully? Like, yes, I am designating this as my sacrifice. Is this part of holding it steady so that it can be sacrificed in a specific way? It can be slaughtered in a specific way? We get these things to think about. Also, we get the specific breakdown of how the actual sacrificing and slaughtering is going to go. Now, I think this is really important because we have to consider the possibility. This is several years later. We have a new generation of Kohanim. They are looking over what they need to do. Where better to look than the original guide provided from Moses by the voice of God? So this book is not just a testimony to hear about it, but also a guide, much like other chapters I've talked about, how this is actually done. The Kohanim could read this and know exactly how it needs to be done, as could the citizenry. Putting that aside, there's also the statute added at the end related to the eating of blood and fat. Don't do it in any of your dwelling places. So this is a very interesting commandment, right? So this is something to keep in mind no matter where you are. Don't eat fat and don't eat blood. Those things are not kosher. All right, fifth portion, chapter 4, verse 1 of Leviticus. And the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, Speak to the children of Israel, saying, If a person sins unintentionally by committing one of all the commandments of the Lord, which may not be committed, and he commits part of one of them, if the anointed Cohen sins, bringing guilt to the people, then he shall bring for his sin which he has committed an unblemished young bull as a sin offering to the Lord. And he shall bring the bull to the entrance of the tent of meeting before the Lord, and he shall lean his hand forcefully upon the bull's head and slaughter the bull before the Lord. And the anointed Cohen shall take from the bull's blood and bring it into the tent of meeting. And the Cohen shall dip his fingers into the blood and sprinkle some of the blood 7 times before the Lord, before the dividing curtain of the sanctuary. And the Cohen shall place some of the blood on the horns of the incense altar which is in the tent of meeting, before the Lord, and he shall pour all the blood of the bull onto the base of the altar used for burnt offerings, which is at the entrance of the tent of meeting. And all the fat of the sin offering bull he shall separate from it, the fat covering the innards, and all the fat that is on the innards, and the 2 kidneys along with the fat that is on them, which is on the flanks, and the diaphragm with the liver along with the kidneys he shall remove it. Just as was separated from the bull sacrificed as a peace offering, the Cohen shall then cause them to go up in smoke on the altar used for burnt offerings. He shall then take the bull's skin and all of its flesh, along with its head and along with its legs, its innards and its waste matter. He shall take out the entire bull to a clean place outside the camp, namely to the ash depository, and he shall burn it in fire on wood. Thus it shall be burnt in the ash depository. And if the entire community of Israel errs because a matter was hidden from the eyes of the congregation, and they commit one of all the commandments of the Lord which may not be committed, incurring guilt, when the sin which they had committed becomes known, the congregation shall bring a young bull as a sin offering. They shall bring it before the tent of meeting. The elders of the community shall lean their hands forcefully upon the bull's head before the Lord, and one shall slaughter the bull before the Lord. The anointed Cohen shall bring some of the bull's blood into the tent of meeting, and the Cohen shall dip his finger from the blood and sprinkle it 7 times before the Lord, before the dividing curtain. And he shall then place some of the blood on the horns of the altar that is before the Lord in the tent of meeting. And then he shall pour all the blood onto the base of the altar used for burnt offerings, which is at the entrance to the tent of meeting. And he shall separate all of its fat from it, and cause it to go up in smoke on the altar. He shall do to the bull just as he did to the bull of the sin offering, thus shall he do it. Thus the Kohen shall make atonement for them, the community, and they will be forgiven. And he shall take the bull outside the camp and burn it, just as he burned the first bull. It is a sin offering for the congregation. If a leader of Israel sins and unintentionally commits one of all the commandments of the Lord, which may not be committed, incurring guilt, if his sin that he has committed is made known to him, then he shall bring his offering an unblemished male goat. And he shall lean his hand forcefully upon the goat's head and slaughter it in the place where he slaughters burnt offerings. Before the Lord it is a sin offering. And the Kohen shall take some of the blood of the sin offering with his finger and place it on the horns of the altar used for burnt offerings. And then he shall pour its blood onto the base of the altar used for burnt offerings. And he shall cause all its fat to go up in smoke on the altar, just like the fat of the peace offering. Thus the Kohen shall make atonement for his sin, and he will be forgiven. All right, so here we have the breakdown of who needs to do what and how when sins are committed. So we heard about sin offerings and atonement offerings and things like that in the previous chapters. Now, or portions, I should say, in chapters. Now we get the breakdown of exactly who and how sacrifices should be made based upon the transgression. So these are for both known sins and unknown sins. So an unknown sin is when you do something wrong without knowing you were doing something wrong, right? So if you accidentally broke the law when you had no idea that it was the law, or you moved something, right? This is a very specific example. Oh, look at that. This thing is sticking out in the middle of the road. I better move it just so nobody gets hurt. And in doing so, you accidentally cause a domino effect, which results in some sort of sin being transgressed. These kinds of things. So those are kind of unknown sins. You have done something, not realizing the consequences were that it caused you to have a sin. So there is a way to handle this. There's a way to be absolved of that sin and atone. You must make a sacrifice. And also it's interesting, right? The entire community can also be found guilty of a sin. And so can the Kohanim. So no one is exempt, and I think it's very important. It talks about everything from peace offerings in the previous down to here, talking about sin offerings. And it's from the highest level, the Kohanim, down to community leaders as a whole, the congregation as a whole sinning, then individual leaders, and then, of course, individuals. So we get to see all the steps that can be done and how the sacrifice is conducted, but also the fact that, yes, all of these things, which you're definitely going to do, there are definitely going to be sins. How are you going to compensate for those sins? Well, no matter who you are in the hierarchy of things, this is how you're going to get it done. It also dictates specifically the kind of creatures that are brought for the specific sorts of transgressions and by whom. Once again, also, the indication of placing a hand on the creature before the sacrifice seems very significant to me. It's been repeated every single time. On to the sixth portion, chapter 4 of Leviticus, verse 27. If one person of the people of the land commits a sin unintentionally by his committing one of the commandments of the Lord which may not be committed, incurring guilt, if his sin that he committed is made known to him, he shall bring his sacrifice, an unblemished female goat, for his sin that he committed. And he shall lean his hand forcefully on the head of the sin offering, and he shall slaughter the sin offering in the place of the burnt offering. And the Cohen shall take some of its blood with his finger, and place it on the horns of the altar used for burnt offerings. And then he shall pour all of its remaining blood at the base of the altar. And he shall remove all of its fat, just as the fat was removed from the peace offering. The Cohen shall then cause it to go up in smoke on the altar, as a pleasing fragrance to the Lord. Thus the Cohen shall make atonement for him, and he will be forgiven. If he brings a sheep for his sin offering, he shall bring an unblemished female. He shall lean his hand forcefully upon the head of the sin offering, and slaughter it as a sin offering in the place where he slaughters the burnt offering. And the Cohen shall take some of the blood of the sin offering with his finger, and place it on the horns of the altar used for burnt offerings. And then he shall pour all of its blood onto the base of the altar. And he shall remove all its fat, just as the sheep's fat is removed from the peace offering. The Cohen shall then cause them to go up in smoke on the altar, upon the fires for the Lord. Thus the Cohen shall make atonement for him for his sin which he committed, and he will be forgiven. Chapter 5, verse 1. If a person sins whereby he accepts an oath, and he is a witness to some matter by seeing or knowing it, yet he does not testify, he shall bear his transgression. Or if a person touches anything unclean, whether it is the carcass of an unclean wild animal, or the carcass of an unclean domestic animal, or the carcass of an unclean creeping animal, and it was hidden from him, he incurs guilt. Or if he touches the uncleanness of a human with any uncleanness through which he may be defiled, and it is hidden from him, and later he knows, he has incurred guilt. Or if a person swears, expressing with his lips to do harm or to do good, whatever a man may express in an oath, and it is hidden from him, and later he knows, he is guilty in any one of these cases. And it shall be when someone incurs guilt in any one of these cases that he shall confess the sin which he had committed. And he shall bring his guilt offering to the Lord for his sin which he had committed, a female animal from the flock, either a sheep or a goat, for a sin offering, and the Cohen shall make atonement from his sin. But if he cannot afford a sheep, he shall bring as his guilt offering for that sin that he had committed 2 turtle doves or 2 young doves before the Lord, one for a sin offering and one for a burnt offering. He shall bring them to the Kohen, who shall first offer up that bird which is designated for the sin offering. He shall cut its head by piercing with his nail opposite the back of its head, but shall not separate it. He shall sprinkle from the blood of the sin offering on the wall of the altar, and the remainder of the blood shall be pressed out onto the base of the altar. It is a sin offering. And he shall offer up the second one as a burnt offering, according to the law. Thus the Kohen shall make atonement for him for his sins which he had committed, and he shall be forgiven. Okay, so once again, we get some more elaboration on the kinds of sins that can accidentally happen. We also get a specific breakdown of some examples that have definitely been the case where someone incurs an unknown sin. So this is how they will first be found guilty of it, and then how they will go about atoning for it. Now, previously, it did mention in the earlier sections, right, we're talking about we have different kinds of animals. So how do we know what kind of animal you should bring? Well, it gives you the very specific types for female animals here, or in the case of a person who's too poor to afford the other animals, birds. So that is the significance of why we had the different versions, right? Earlier, we heard about all the different kinds. So why? It's based on what you can afford to pay for. I mean, think about it. You have 2 people in the same congregation, one rich, one poor. They both commit a sin, but the rich guy is going to be paying a lot less relative to his overall wealth than the poor guy would if they both had to give the same thing. So here we have adjusted rates for atonement. Basically, we see that the cheaper option for the people who can't afford the more expensive one is they still have a way to atone. Moving on to the 7th portion. Chapter 5, verse 11. But if he cannot afford 2 turtle doves or 2 young doves, then he shall bring as his sacrifice for his sin 1/10 of an ephah of flour for a sin offering. He shall not put oil over it, nor shall he place frankincense upon it, for it is a sin offering. He shall bring it to the Kohen, and the Kohen shall scoop out a fistful as its reminder, and it cause it to go up in smoke on the altar. Upon the fires of the Lord it is a sin offering. Thus the Kohen shall make atonement for his sin that he had committed in any one of these cases, and it shall be forgiven. And it shall belong to the Kohen like the meal offering. And the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, If a person commits a betrayal and trespasses unintentionally against one of the things sacred to the Lord, he shall bring as his guilt offering to the Lord an unblemished ram from the flock with a value of silver shekels, in accordance with the shekel of the sanctuary for a guilt offering. And what he has trespassed against the holy thing he shall pay, and he shall add 1/5 of its value to it, and he shall give it to the Kohen. The Kohen shall then make atonement for him through the ram of the guilt offering, and he shall be forgiven. If a person sins and commits one of the commandments of the Lord which may not be committed, but he does not know, he is guilty, and he shall bear his transgression. He shall bring an unblemished ram from the flock, with the value for a guilt offering, to the Kohen. The Kohen shall make atonement for his unintentional sin which he committed and did not know, and he shall be forgiven. It is a guilt offering, he has incurred guilt before the Lord. And the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, If a person sins, betraying the Lord by falsely denying to his fellow concerning a deposit or money given in hand, or an object taken by robbery, or he withheld funds from his fellow, or he found a lost article, and he denied it and swore falsely regarding any one of all these cases whereby a man may sin, and it shall be when he has sinned and is found guilty, that he shall return the article which he had robbed, or the funds which he had withheld, or the item which had been deposited with him, or the article which he had found, or anything else regarding which he had sworn falsely. He shall pay it with its principal, adding its fifths to it. He shall give it to its rightful owner on the day he repents for his guilt. He shall then bring his guilt offering to the Lord, an unblemished ram from the flock with the same value for a guilt offering to the Kohen. And the Kohen shall make atonement for him before the Lord, and he shall be forgiven for any one of all cases whereby one may commit a sin, incurring guilt through it. That's the end of that portion. So now we once again hear about those who can't afford even less than a bird. They give an offering of flour. It's given a very specific way, but it ultimately is made just as the others are according to the commandments given here. Also, specific details about those who make false testimonies, who lie about financial matters, who steal, or who take the funds that they should have paid somebody, right? You owe someone $5 for their day of work or whatever. They did a job. You don't pay them. That's a punishment right there. And not only do you have to pay it, but you also have to pay 1/5 on top of that. So it's definitely something that you don't want. I specified stealing, but in this case, I think it's only stealing in the case of being caught rather than the person making a guilt offering. I stole it. Then he goes in, after making his confession and offering his sin offering, he also pays back the item plus 1/5 of it. So that should help clear that up, the difference between a regular thief and a thief who is seeking repentance and atonement. So with all that, we now know this is the path to forgiveness for those who commit these sorts of financial and also sworn sins. This is the way to find your atonement. With all that said, the Kohen shall make atonement for him, and that's going to be the end of it. That concludes this week's portion of Vayikra. We learned a lot about the different kinds of sacrifices made and why, as well as how to go about doing them, and also the circumstances around those sacrifices relative to your financial income level, and so on. Very interesting to see the way they actually went about the sacrifice process, right? This was the means of atonement, and it shows also the significance of sacrifice as a regular occurrence inside of the events of the books of Moses during the times in exile across the desert, and how things would be done inside of the Holy Temple. Interestingly, later on, you see that as time goes on during the different periods in the Judean kingdoms, how they would go about fulfilling these commandments for sin offerings, as people were living further and further away from Jerusalem or from the Holy Temple and so on. Rather than carrying their animals or transporting animals across the country, what they would do is they would just bring the money and they would buy the animal on site. So this is something that would over time be adapted into something of a business where you buy the flock directly from the Kohanim and then also pay the offering amount, and that's how you can travel without having to bring animals across the whole journey all the way to sacrifice. Interesting how people adapt while trying to maintain the law. All the same, that's the end for this week. Thanks for listening. Hope you found it educational and enjoyed the material. I sure learned quite a bit about the details of sacrifice. In any case, this has been Shmuel Moshe with the Weekly Parashahcast for Parashat Vayikra, and I hope you'll join us next time for yet another riveting tale of recounting the Torah. Until then, this has been Shmuel Moshe. Baruch Hashem.